While Doug is switching over, let me share with you that in addition to the transportation drop-in sessions, OSBA also holds what we call a town hall meeting. They happen each Wednesday afternoon. And on one of those, which was May the 20th, I did a presentation on transportation and the impacts of COVID-19. There's some information there about seating capacity, what social distancing might mean on a school bus. And so that PowerPoint and also that presentation is recorded, and Lori has put the address in our chat box. So if you're interested in that, take a look in the chat box. Doug, it's up to you.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Just want to let you know there isn't any cake at OSBA today for the graduates. So I don't get to have a piece either. So we do miss this very much. And congratulations to all of you that have done your 3 years worth of training and attending classes. We really do appreciate it. We really are here to help you all we can help you.
Hey, Doug, maximize that screen while Doug's doing that. Couple of notes for those of you that are in your third year. We've enjoyed having you here. I like the MTA program personally because in our work preparing things to help you out, it helps us to stay current with what your needs are. I enjoy the classroom face-to-face interaction with each one of you because the questions are valuable. And when you ask questions, it helps me to understand what your needs are. And I want to say to you, as a graduate MTA, you don't have to be a stranger. We have a number of other folks that have gone through the complete MTA program and keep coming back. You are always welcome to come back. We are in a 3-year rotation cycle, but every year, you know, when we get to that 3rd year recycle, the classes change a little bit. So you'll hear some of the same stuff, but you'll hear a bunch of new stuff every time also.
So it's important to make sure that you're documenting everything, and things you want to document for are your budgetary controls and establishing proper intervals for routine maintenance. It's important to know if you're having road calls, if you're having breakdowns on the road, how many miles are you getting between those? And identify repetitive failures. You know, is it the same things breaking on each of the bus? And then tracking performance of rebuild or aftermarket parts. Those are important things to document, but you don't have to rely just on your own documentation for tracking of rebuild or aftermarket parts. You know, that's where networking is great. Find out what's working for other people or what's not working. You know, you can use decision making that they've had with good or bad experiences to help your programs. Early warnings of impending major problems such as increased oil consumption, or if your DEF system, your particulate filter is plugging more often than necessary, you need to regen. You know, watch those things. Those are items that can show that things are going downhill quickly, and then you can research those before you have a major repair. Well, we were on a few slides earlier, but it's important also for documentation to make sure you have that information for warranty repairs and for warranty claims. Those are becoming more and more important to have that information. In the trucking world right now, with extended warranties, they're really asking for a lot more supplemental information. So make sure you're documenting everything. Pete already talked about the construction standards, so we're going to skip that slide. Motor vehicle inspections, we talk about that manual. We're going to go ahead and skip that slide, and then we're going to slip all the way down to things to avoid. You know, Dan hit it already. Ohio State Patrol MVI teams, you know, they're not intended to be in maintenance, your maintenance program. That's the fastest way to the patrol off to a bad start, is when they come in and they want and they have a whole list of things that should have been caught in regular maintenance items. And then lack of funds, you know, that's not an excuse to not make repairs. You're responsible to make sure that bus is in the condition that it was when you bought it. We can't just let things go on buses. Even if they're old, they still have to be maintained to the level of what you bid them. And inspections are based on safety. You know, that's the MVI team is actually your team too, because they're bringing a vast amount of knowledge with them when they come. They can also help you make decisions on what to look for periodically, especially if you get new buses. Ask them, what have you seen on some of these older buses? They're a really good resource for information. The data records, just a slide before that, Pete. It's a administrative code requirement that you must keep records. You know, you must keep records also for the T2. Things you should track are fuel expense, tire expense, parts and supplies. A lot of your bus routing software and some of your good maintenance programs, all of these things can break these costs down and this data down for you to report per bus. But if you don't have access to that, there's a simple program in Excel called Repair Tracker. You can open up a repair tracker for each vehicle. It's already in your templates, and just look it up. You can make that for each vehicle. You can keep those expenses and the fuel costs recorded separately. Two special items: tires. Tracking tire life and cost. Study your tire failure and wear patterns. Is there a certain pattern of tires that wear better on your bus? Do they wear better on the front? Are certain traction tires better? We found in our district that even the traction tires that had the solid wall, the solid rib on the outside, wore better than the ones that were the open lugs all the way across. Just those things are individual for districts. Depends on your roads, your road conditions, your speeds, your braking, how often, how many stops there are on routes. Just keep all of that in consideration. Supplies, too. Supplies are things that you don't attribute to a particular bus, like windshield washer fluid, or maybe your clearance lights. Maybe you buy clearance lights in bulk, and because you don't want to track them for each bus. But those are things you can use in your supplies. Track your costs separately though for each bus. Your major cost, your brakes, and your tires, and try to keep all of those costs tracked. It's important because those are decision-making tools that you can rely on later. Know your cost. So the state average annual bus cost for fiscal 19 was $3,080 for maintenance and repairs, $461 for each bus for tires, and $1,103 for maintenance supplies. You know, those are the averages. How does your district compare? For preventive maintenance that Dan talked a lot about, that's going to cost you on average about $1,000 per bus every year. That's the time and material and cost it takes to change filters and maintenance items, those items that Dan went down. If you can lower your repair costs, what you can track by having this data, by recording it per bus. And then that is information you can use to know when it's smarter to replace the bus than it is to repair it. We've seen school districts take the whole sides off bus and replace sides of buses and floor joists and spend $35,000 on a 12 or 15-year-old bus. Is that a smart way to invest your district's money? Fuel cost. The state average fuel cost for fiscal year 19 was $5,043 per bus. And this is on buses based on double routing. Most of the buses are double routed. It's important to track your miles per gallon for each bus. Again, if you see a decrease in performance, sometimes that can mean a major engine issue or something that needs to go into the shop to get repaired. And that we always suggest that you use your best performance buses, your best miles per gallon on the longest routes. That just stretches your fuel dollars. I said that earlier, when MPG falls, check your maintenance. And then when all else fails, replace the bus. When the fuel is getting to that 3 to 4 miles per gallon, you really need to watch what needs to be replaced, more than likely the whole bus. And other fuel issues. So is there shrinkage and or loss? And is purchasing purchasing quality fuel at the best price? That's very important. You want to make sure that the quality of fuel that you're buying is good. And separate the buses from the other vehicles. If there's a large maintenance fleet that uses a lot of fuel, make sure that fuel is tracked on those vehicles, so you know exactly what your fuel costs are for your buses. Also, make sure your drivers are keeping track of the fuel they're using on their buses. It's easy to forget. It's easy to forget to write things down. That's a inventory control issue. Make sure that you have a way to monitor and manage that. So your life cycle analysis, a typical school bus loses 50% of its value in the first 5 years. And after that, it loses 10% of the value. So we know what a 10-year-old bus is worth, right? It's a mercy payment, $2,500 to get it out of your hair. Look at the value that's lost in that time. When you consider how much it costs to buy buses, are we trading our buses at the right point? Are we investing too much money as they get older and then not having money in the general revenue fund to replace buses? These are all decisions that's data that you're collecting per bus is very, very important for. So when is it time to replace the bus? Look at your fuel mileage. Some of these older buses, the engines were never that efficient. And you got 4 to 5 miles per gallon. As they age, that slips. Our new buses are 8 to 10 miles per gallon due to the maintenance, due to the fuel management systems, the high pressure injectors. So there is a fuel savings. And then your annual maintenance costs, if you take off that $1,000 and you can save $2,800 a year, if that's over 5 years time, you're not spending that on a new bus, that adds up to money that you can have set aside to purchase new buses. If you have a 12 or a 13 or 14-year-old bus, what is actually the remaining life and value of that bus? How much money do you put into it? Do you put $35,000 into it? Because that's only half the price of a new bus. A new bus there's cost avoidance with a new bus that you do not have with old buses. You do the math. Sometimes it's cheaper to buy a new bus than it is to keep an old one. We've talked about that. Lease purchases can accelerate fleet replacement. Dan talked extensively about buying warranties. That also reduces your labor needs. If you can take a bus in under warranty, you don't have your mechanic working on it. What we have found is that if you trade a bus in when it still has value, an 8-year-old bus is still worth around $25,000. That can offset the cost of that new bus purchase. And then if you're saving $10,000 or $12,000 over that lifetime, you're getting up there to $35,000 or $40,000 worth of value that you can offset your bus purchases, your new bus purchases with. Districts like to work on a 5-year forecast. Look at what it costs them out of the general revenue, and then what purchasing a new bus, what it can do for you. If you have a bus replacement plan, make sure that it's both fixed and flexible. Look at what age are you trading your buses off of, but also look at what condition the buses are in. Don't get rid of the oldest bus necessarily if you've put a lot of money in an engine and a transmission and it's a pretty good bus, and you have one that's getting bad, it's deteriorating quickly. You're going to have to put that same amount of money into that next bus or that next year. So watch when you trade buses that you're trading off not just the oldest bus, but trading off the worst bus. Make sure you're replacing the worst bus with a new bus. And like we said earlier, make sure that new bus goes on its longest route so you can recoup some of that savings in fuel mileage. Practical speaking, 200,000 miles is about the fiscal end of a bus where you're getting just about everything has been pounded. The life has been pounded out of the bus by this point. Your floor joists, your suspension, everything has seen a lot of abuse, especially on some of the rough roads. And some districts have a lot worse roads than other districts. So again, look at what your mileage is on your buses and go back to that data and look at what you're replacing often. Again, when costs get out of bounds, it's cheaper to replace the bus because you're going to offset some of those costs coming up. And then the best plan is make sure that it has flexibility. Make sure that you have some flexibility in there, but have a plan. If you know that you're going to trade off bus number 10 next year, that's a spare bus. You don't have to rely on that. Maybe you don't put new sides on it. Maybe you don't put a new transmission in it. Maybe it gets through your inspection and it's okay to run for a year, but you limit what you're going to spend on that bus. That's how you can offset some of your costs, your repair costs, by having a bus purchase plan. The best fiscal management is if you can decrease the average age of your fleet, but More importantly, make sure you're trying to decrease the average age of your route buses. They're the ones doing the majority of the work. That's where the majority of your money goes. Watch that average age of your route buses. We said earlier in a few slides, trade the buses when they still have value and before they start to break. Get rid of the buses before you have to invest that $10 or $12,000 into them. Know when to trade with the data and the collections. And then if you don't have a lot of data, rely on your network. Ask your network. Districts that lay next to you usually have some of the similar road conditions. Watch and see what they're doing. Peter mentioned earlier that the mechanic ratio is 1 mechanic for every 14 buses. That's a lot of time spent. That's a lot of labor and a lot of time spent on our fleet. A younger fleet, you can get by with 1 mechanic for 30 buses. Again, with warranty work, some of that major work, some of that heavy lifting is put back on dealers or OEM manufacturers, engine or transmission. So it also gives you some flexibility with your mechanic. You know, one thing about buying a lot of buses in 1 year is they all wear out at the same time. They also, as anyone remembers a carpenter fleet, they also can have the same flaw all at the same time. When you load up in 1 model year, you have to be aware of this. You have to watch it very carefully. Back up your sizes and needs. Know what your district needs. In more than one size, sometimes districts use more than one size. Maybe you have city routes and country routes. Maybe you have different needs. Know what your sizes and needs are. If you have all 84 passenger buses, you certainly don't want to buy a 72 passenger bus because it's not going to fit into your fleet the way you want it to fit, and it's going to limit your flexibility. So try to buy buses that fit best into your fleet. Also, there are different life cycles by different needs. Special needs buses, sometimes they run a lot of miles. They have to cover a larger share of the district. That can shorten their life. Also, there's special equipment, lifts, and the track. We've had the aluminum track become corroded and break on an 8-year-old special needs bus just because the salt that comes in on the feet and comes in on the wheelchairs and comes in on the traffic of the kids. You know, watch that. Special needs buses have more equipment. Make sure you're keeping track of that, making sure that those have extra cleaning requirements. Maybe you're using a sweeper to sweep out the debris out of that track so the moisture and stuff doesn't build up into them. Our field trip buses, you know, they're usually typically they're older to start with. And what happens with older buses is they sit there for a couple of days or maybe a week, and you go to start it and you've got electrical gremlins. A lot of those electrical gremlins are caused by faulty grounds. There's a little corrosion between the ground straps and the battery. It causes a lot of electrical fatigue. A lot of different drivers drive the bus. There are things that just doesn't get reported. If it was my bus, I would report it. If it was my bus, I would get it fixed. Make sure that your drivers, any driver that drives a spare bus or a field trip bus, make sure that they know that they can document things that they think are wrong. Gives it a chance for the mechanic to look at it. Without that communication between the mechanics and the drivers, a lot of the repairs get missed. Then mechanics feel bad when it comes in for this year inspection or the spot inspection and it doesn't pass. It's because they didn't know. Make sure that communication stays important. Address your seating capacity. You know, larger buses require larger sub buses. If you have a large fleet of large buses, you know, make sure that you have large sub buses to account for that, or have a plan that if your large bus breaks down, you have a plan to separate separate the route so you can get them all on the buses. That you experience some districts wanting to buy a couple of big field trip buses. You know, they only want to run 1 bus on a field trip. They don't want to run 1 bus or 2 buses for the football team. Those big buses cost you extra money on your routes. They cost extra to buy, and they usually cost extra when it comes to repair and maintenance. Is it worth buying the big bus when you can send the 3rd bus on a field trip? So be careful when you're looking at capacity issues. Try to pencil what your costs are going to end up being. We talk about model years and brands. You know, there are pros and cons of both. You know, if you have a fleet that has a lot of different buses, a lot of different model years, you know, that increases inventory. It also increases the amount of knowledge that the mechanics have to have. It also increases the knowledge that your sub bus drivers have to have when they go from bus to bus to bus. the switches are in different locations. They break different. The transmissions are different. There are different blind spots. You need a wider dealer network, but it does increase the bidding competitiveness. You know, when you have buses and you're letting all the vendors bid, it does increase the competitiveness. But your major issues are compartmentalized. You know, you're minimizing. If you have a major issue, maybe you only have 2 or 3 buses that have it instead of half of your fleet. So you want to make sure that you know the difference. Things that if you have all the vehicles that are similar, you know, you don't need to keep as many different switches. Your inventory is easier. Your product knowledge, you know, the mechanics and the drivers know much more about every one of those buses. It's much more easy to switch from bus to bus. And then common defects are known. If you know you're having trouble with one bus, more than likely the sister buses are also going to have that defect. You can maybe catch that before you have a breakdown on the road. Maybe those can be repaired or maintained earlier instead of having a driver that has trouble out on the road. The problem is it does decrease the bidding competition. If you're only buying from one vendor, you know, you're probably going to not receive bids from the other vendor. It does decrease the competition. If you have buses that are a lot of different buses, and you have a major issue, you have 1 or 2 buses go down. If you have a major issue with a fleet all of the same, you can paralyze your district. Make sure you know what you're doing. Pete has that in a slide, that the carpenter syndrome. One issue can really wipe out a fleet in a hurry. So make sure that you are really doing your homework and you're getting what you need and you're planning around those needs. School bus purchasing, there may be state money for fiscal 21 for bus purchases. We just don't know. Pete, did you want to mention any of this?
Yeah, just so that everybody knows, ODE put out information back before the pandemic hit. There's a $20 million line item for bus purchase for the coming fiscal year. It's a 1-year only program. Obviously, that was allocated by the legislature in the last budget cycle. We've already seen cuts for fiscal 20. We've been told there are cuts coming in fiscal 21. We've not seen any information from ODE. And in fact, to be honest with them, they may not know what the legislature and the governor are planning either. Here's the bottom line when we talk about state funding for school buses. If you need a bus, buy a bus. And I know there's a lot of treasurers out there will say, well, if we're not getting money, we can't do it. Or if there's going to be money, we're going to wait for it. Waiting for money to come down the pike is a false economy. You've seen enough slides and data herein that the longer you keep an old bus on the road, the more money that's coming out of your pocket. So, you know, if you need help convincing a treasurer or a superintendent that it's time to replace, give us a call. We'll help you figure out how to show them the numbers on a spreadsheet. Keeping an old bus is kind of like keeping an old boat. You're just throwing money into a hole in the lake and it doesn't do you any good. So, you know, bottom line, don't hold your breath waiting for state money. If you need one, buy one.
There are also EPA grants available. They're not available in every county. They're called the CMAQ counties, where the air quality, they're trying to address the air quality first. But you can check with EPA. You can check with us. We have that information about the CMAQ counties. Send us questions if you would like to know about those things. We'll hook you up with the EPA. And know that the purchase process is a very detailed process and it's defined in law. So you really need to start with an analysis, and we've talked a lot about that. Understand what size you need, what type you need. Is there special equipment you need? Is there a certain date that it's needed by? Understand that the delivery date is not the same as the in-service date. It can take a while to get a bus in, get it through the prep sequence, get that inspection by the MVI team. So know that you need a month or so of lead time in that in-service time. But really focus on what you need. Talk to your drivers, talk to your mechanic. It's not necessarily just a one-person decision, but if you have the data from the previous years about what each individual bus does, you can use all of this to make that decision.
Hey, Doug.
Yeah.
Another thing to consider, that special equipment. Talk with your special ed directors. See what may be coming down the road. Because last thing you want to do is buy a special needs bus with one wheelchair tied down, just to find out they're working with 4 parents, and next thing you know, you got 4 wheelchairs. Because it takes a while to get those in. So the communication part with special ed directors is key too.
Students, they do change often, don't they?
Yes. And rather quickly sometimes.
So a tip that can help you if you're buying your special ed buses, you can order a bus that's set up for 4 or 5 wheelchairs, but then ask the manufacturer to install seats in those places. At least 2 of the manufacturers have track mounted systems so that you can put seats in and take them out. And what that does is gives you more flexibility. Dan's exactly right. If you have a wheelchair bus with only 1 position in it, and then they tell you August 15th that you've got 3 chairs, it's too late to fix. So when you buy those buses, think about buying them in a convertible configuration.
That rolls right into that very next slide, Pete. Research the market, talking with the vendors, knowing what options are available. You have the construction manual has that options list in it. Look at that. Don't limit yourself. Don't limit yourself to just one seller. Just look and research all of them. Find out what other districts are saying. What are they happy with? What do they wish they would have done different? What options do they wish they would have? I talked with one district that was replacing step wells on every bus at 8 to 9 years of age, and they didn't know that you could order stainless steel step wells in the buses to eliminate that corrosion issue. Find out, talk to your network, evaluate the service resources too. That's important when you're buying a bus. Is there service available? How far will you have to go? What is their history? You're buying something that's you're gonna have for 10 or 15 years. Make sure that you know what's available. After you do a needs assessment, you're going to prepare a specification package. You're going to prepare a list of things that you need specifically for your district. That needs to then be posted. You need to put a bid together. You need to run an ad at least 2 weeks ahead of the bid meeting. That's all in code. 1 week, you need to run that twice, but the second week, it can be just that bid advertisement can be on your district website. You want to establish the opening date of the bid 7 days after the last bid is advertisement. So you want to make sure that you always plan for your lead time on your advertisements. You want to create a bid packet for the vendors with instructions. You want to include the body, the specifications on the body and the chassis. You want to create a bid form, and you want their tax statement included. Do they owe any personal property tax? Bid bonds were eliminated a few years ago. That's not a requirement anymore, but it is a local decision. You can still require that if in your bid package, if that's what your board or your treasurer or your superintendent decide.
Well, let me just make a comment on that. The reason why we eliminated it is because it's a cost item. I've been doing transportation in Ohio for a little bit better than 40 years. And for most of those years, bid bonds were a requirement. I have never, ever seen a sale default and a district cash in on a bid bond. So to understand what a bid bond is, it's an insurance program. And when you require the vendors to do those, they have to go out to an underwriter, they have to pay for that insurance program, and that cost gets tacked on to what you're paying for the bus. They don't eat that, they're passing it on. So know that, if you have an old school treasurer who says they want that, talk to them. If they have questions and you want to call me and we have a conference call, that's fine. But really the reason why we eliminated it is it's not a solid business practice for you.
Urgent necessity. Are you waiting until you get your MVI team tells you that the buses won't pass inspection anymore and you need to go out and buy buses right away? It's not a good place to be. You're not able to avoid much cost that way. That's a 2 board meeting. They have to pass a resolution and then they pass the purchase agreement. So you really can bid your buses if you know what you're doing. If you have a list of specifications that you're working on often, you can get a bid around and do your bid process in about the same length of time. That creates more competitive bidding. The single source purchase, not typically true. You just really can't go out and buy from your local dealer like you do your own vehicles. And try to avoid creating this. Don't wait till you need a bus and they're the only ones that have a bus. Again, you're looking for ways to leverage what you are spending. You really eliminate that competitive bidding and that price point that you get by having that competitive bidding. There is a cooperative purchasing. It eliminates the need to advertise. It may or may not help on price. That's do you want to expand that just a little bit for them?
Yeah, I do. Before I do that, though, Deb just asked a question and I answered it to her, but I think I want to reiterate this for everybody. Deb's question was, what's a good average age for your route bus fleet? So let me answer that by sharing some other numbers with you. When I look at state data and analyze the age of our school buses, the average age of a school bus in Ohio is right around 10 years of age. That's the average. All right, so that means that we've got some buses that are 20 years old and we got some buses that are brand new. That's not the right place to be. When we do the financial analysis on school buses, a bus that's more than 8 years old is no longer fiscally feasible to keep. That's young. I mean, we've all been working off of a benchmark thinking 12 to 15 years should be our replacement target. But the reality of it is, if you look at the straight line depreciation graph, if you look at warranty policies, if you look at when major components start to fail, right around that 8-year age is when you start getting upside down on your investment. So having said that, if you're looking for an ideal environment, you want your route buses to be no older than 8 years of age and your substitute and field trip buses to be no older than 12 years of age. That is decidedly lower numbers than we've experienced. And so this takes some work with you and the treasurer, helping them to understand the cash flow. This is exactly why you all need to keep detailed records on each bus. And so if you have buses that are 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, you need to know exactly how many dollars you're spending on that bus every year. Think about it. It's not just fuel, it's not just parts, but how much labor time is going into it. Also, how much do you trust that bus? You know, if you send a 12-year-old bus out on the road, okay, arguably everybody has one old bus that's the best bus in the fleet, mostly because the drivers like it. But most of those 12-year-old buses, you're probably not going to send them from Cincinnati to Cleveland because you don't trust it as well. And so, you know, the public values us by our dependability. And if we put old buses out there that are going to break down, that really hurts our image. So my guidance, that's a long way to answer Deb's question, which is a great question. I believe a good average age for your route fleet should be 5 to 6 years of age. Then if you add in your field trip and your spare buses, you know, it's okay if those are in that 8 to 12-year-old range, but I would not include them when you calculate the average. So that dispatches Deb's question. And then Doug's question was, will cooperative purchasing help you with the price of your bus? I've gotten this question from legislators. I've gotten it from 3 governors during my time in the business. And here's what a lot of folks don't know. The sales margin on school buses is only about 2%. So this is not like the car market where dealers are raking in thousands of dollars every time they sell a car. Bus dealers are barely making enough money to cover their overhead when they sell you a new bus. What happens when you do a bulk purchase, and so if you're going to buy, say, 8, 9, 10 buses or more, then the dealers go back to the factory and say, hey, I have a big purchase pending. As a factory, can you give us what's called factory assistance? And what they then do is drop the price they charge the dealer. The dealer passes that savings on to you, and that's how you leverage the best purchasing power. Cooperative purchasing doesn't do that. And so here's some of your ears are going to perk up because you're going to say, well, wait a minute. The co-op that we belong to says because we're buying more buses, we get a better deal. But here's the problem. For a factory to offer incentive for purchasing, they want to put 8, 9, 10 buses down the assembly line that are identical. They're not customized. So they all have the same options. So if you can buy 10 buses that are identical, you could get another 2, 3, 4, or 5% discount on the pricing. But in a cooperative purchase where we do what's called a spec bid, and any of the co-ops, they all work the same way. They put out a menu and you would pick from the menu. Every district gets to pick its own items, and then you place the order. Each one of those buses is different. And so, you know, if one district buys one bus configured like this, another bus district then buys a bigger bus or a smaller bus or transit. They're really individual purchases. So do the co-ops get a little break in price? They do, because the dealers cut the margins as much as they can. But it's nowhere near the discounts you can get if you can do a group purchase of buses where they're all identical. Now, having said that, how do you accomplish those discounts without being part of a co-op? Well, if you and 2 or 3 districts around you can all agree on exactly the same bus, and the only difference between those buses is the name and the number you paint on the side of the vehicle, what most manufacturers are saying is if you can get more than 8, 9, 10 buses in a single purchase, then they can go to the factory and the factories will be very competitive. So that's how you leverage cooperative purchasing. And you're going to get a much better price that way than if you were to go through one of the co-ops. And don't get me wrong, I think the co-ops are a great service. They eliminate the need for you to do your own legal ad. They've done all the upfront work. They've collected all the prices. So you're just going to pick off of a list and buy. But it's not going to get you the rock bottom price that you would if you have a bulk purchase of 10 buses or more. Okay, Doug.
And next slide, please. And you know, and the big caution is your bidding is defined by law. So when you put that packet together, that's what you accept. Vendors can't change that afterwards. They can't give you a different bid or a different packet after you've given them the legal deadline. That creates an unfair marketplace and violates the law. Make sure that you put that bid packet together, the vendors all get that bid packet, and it's opened and it's all done in transparency. Next slide. Now you evaluate the bid, see what complies with a spec packet, compare apples to apples. Compare the option. If you want to know what option prices are, put an option page separately so you can itemize that separate cost. You know, identify the lowest responsible bid, and Ohio precludes splitting the bid. So you can't say, well, I'll get 3 buses from this vendor and I'll get 3 buses from that one because the bids were pretty close. You can't, you have to follow the bid. Next one. You issue the purchase contract, you stick to the bid, and then upon delivery, make sure that you're getting the bus that you want. Inspect it. Have your mechanic go through it. Take your bid packet, take your bid spec sheet, and go through it. Make sure that everything that you wanted on that bus is there. When in compliance, call in the MVI team, have them inspection. You must have the title on site. The inspectors will leave you a form. Pete and I went over this earlier. And then make sure the last thing is you update your inventory for your insurance.
When you talk about the delivery inspection, you need to go through them pretty closely because they do miss things at the factory or when they're prepping the bus. So the last thing you want is to come through and have it inspected, and then it doesn't pass, and then it takes you 30 days to get it back again. So go through them with a fine-tooth comb as a mechanic and technician before you call the MVI team in.
The lease purchase option, maybe you need to replace a couple extra buses. This is really a purchasing plan that's stretched out over time. Bidding is still required for these. And then consider the options for the purchase plan. You know, there's different options for the lease purchase option. You can do a vendor or the bus manufacturer. There are banks, maybe you work really closely with a local bank. They can help you with that lease purchase option because it's really an installment purchase. You're just paying for that bus over time. This last slide with alternative fuels, with diesel fuel getting the cost dropping the way it did, you know, make sure you understand all of the impacts of the alternate fuel costs. Determine the supply and availability. You know, diesel fuel, gasoline, those are pretty standard. They're available everywhere. Your propane and CNG, those are very more specific. Make sure that you know what your supply availability is. All electrics, there are many different manufacturers that are working on the electric components of heavy trucks, everywhere from axles to transmissions to charging systems. There's a lot of work going on in that. We may see all electric buses, but right now they're pretty pricey.
Before we go to the next slide, let me talk for just a minute about these fuels. I've been pretty closely involved with the manufacturers as they look at different fuel options. You can buy buses powered by any of these 5 sources right now. Diesel obviously is the most common. We used to be, most prevalent bus was a gasoline powered bus. Then we switched to diesel. We had the concerns with the dirty diesel and then EPA stepped in. So now we're running clean diesel. There are folks that are concerned with the additives and with the DEF fluids that you have to use for diesel. For that reason, Bluebird and actually International have brought back a gasoline engine. You do need to recognize, though, that when you go from diesel back to gasoline, you are going to lose some fuel economy. I have a close friend who just retired as the vice president of Thomas Bus Body. And in his last market forecast before he retired and went home to enjoy his family, he predicted that within 10 years, we're going to see the all-electric school bus as the prevalent vehicle in the market. That might be a hard thing for us to grasp right now, but know that that's where the technology and the engineering is moving the quickest. We're already seeing many more all-electric vehicles in Europe, and as they work with the LiPo 4 batteries, that's the new generation of the lithium, which has a much better life cycle. It's much lighter than the standard lithium ion. It's also much safer, not as flammable. We're going to start seeing that come on shore here in the US, so we may see more and more of that. Just a note on propane and CNG. Those are both gaseous fuels. The problem with both propane and CNG is they have fewer BTUs of caloric heat per gallon. So when you go from diesel to propane, you lose some energy efficiency, which means that if you're averaging 8 to 10 miles a gallon on diesel for a diesel equivalent in propane, you're going to get 4 or 5 miles a gallon with C decreases. The advantage being that propane and CNG are cheaper, but you have to watch that. This is a spot market. Interestingly enough, what you need to know is that propane is actually a byproduct of the gasoline industry. So if you're thinking about fuel having to come from the refineries, that's where the propane comes from also. CNG is naturally occurring, but even if you are on the eastern side of the state, sitting above the shale reserves, it's not a matter of just driving a post inlet right in your vehicle. There's still processing in there. So things to look at. What I'm saying to folks right now is if you're thinking about alternative fuels right now, there's no fiscal reason to make the switch. If you're making the switch because you want to be greener with less pollutants, that is an advantage of electric propane and CNG. However, you can also be assured that what we're running with diesel right now, the engineers at all 3 of the manufacturers will tell you that the exhaust coming out of a diesel, in many cases, especially in the cities, is cleaner than the air that's going into the diesel. So just things to think about. So as we wrap this up, you have ordered your bus correctly. Maybe this is what will be sitting on the lot in August. This is a vehicle that perhaps the drivers will have a seniority bidding war for because there's no kid seats in there. There's a killer stereo in it. You got tinted windows, and who knows, it might even pop a wheelie, right? So let me wrap up with a few comments here. The first thing I want to do is say thank you to some folks that have helped us. Lori Miller is kind of our producer for the day. She's sitting back there. Hey, Lori, can you turn your mic on for a second and tell us about the upcoming open houses that ODE is holding? Right.
The open houses okay. So ODE, you talking about the town hall next Wednesday?
The town halls. I'm sorry.
That's okay. So we've been hosting some town halls with just some hot topics, and there's a lot of interaction. And like I mentioned, Pete was on one and did a great job talking about some of the transportation hot topics that are coming up. That was, they're all on that COVID resource page. That is, the link is actually from the front page of our website. It takes you directly to the page. All of them have been recorded. The chats are on there. You don't have to log in to get to them. You know, you can watch as little or as much as you want. We will continue those right now just through June. This Wednesday, tomorrow, I guess, we're going to have Dr. John Richard, who's the Ohio Deputy State Superintendent of Public Instruction, going to talk a little bit about reset and restart. I'm not sure how many answers they're going to give definitively on that, but there's certainly going to be a lot of discussion about what schools should be thinking about. And then as far as transportation stuff coming up, we also have we have a reasonable suspicion virtual training coming up on June 9th. We also have some
T reports
on June 17th. Those are all going to be virtual. You can register for them on the website on the events page.
Thanks, Lori. Lori, for those of you who don't know, Lori is our seminar and our conference coordinator at OSBA. So she's the one behind the scenes. She's the one that's putting things up on the website that you click on to register. And then she and Diana work together to make sure we get the registrations in and get you in the classes. So many of you have interacted with Lori over the years. Lori, thank you for helping us out today.
You're welcome. What a great crowd. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We appreciate it.
Super. I also want to say and make a point of saying thanks to Dan Grodhaus. Dan doesn't work for OSBA, but we keep leaning on him and saying, hey, Dan, can you help us out and share some of your experience and some of your knowledge? And Dan also is a go-to when we go down to the legislature and they ask us to testify and say, here's what schools need. Certainly I can answer the question for the legislators, but it means so much more when we have somebody who's actually doing the job now as opposed to doing it 20 years ago. So Dan's been willing to make the drive and come in and meet with us and sit on the task forces. So Dan, thank you for your help today, and thank you for supporting transportation.
You're welcome. Glad I could help out.
So Doug is with me again. He's a regular staffer, and so these last couple of weeks, I've really been focusing on some of the COVID-19 stuff and the task force and some of the other resources. So a couple of weeks ago, I said to Dana and Doug, hey, why don't you guys step up and take the lion's share of the MTA class today? And so they did that. And thank you guys for sharing that information and walking through it with us. So Diana's been messaging me here in the background, so I got to make sure I get all her messages in also. Those of you that are veterans of the MTA program know that after you finish your first year, you get a plaque. I'm sorry, I don't have a plaque to give to you today, but we will get it to you. They are safely in a box in our offices. Like you, we have also been working from home. So we have the plaques, but the plaques are safely there in the office. For those of you that are in your second and third year, what you get to add to the plaque are little plates that go at the bottom. So at the end of the game, you've got a plaque and you've got 3 plates on it, bottom of it, signifying 1 for each year. Deb must be hungry because she wants cake and extra chips in the fall. Diana's listening, so Diana, will you put that on the list and make sure we order a cupcake for Deb so she's happy when she comes back? Projects. Many of you have sent in projects. You all know that as part of MTA, you do a project every year. That's in lieu of a knowledge assessment, which some of you call tests. I'm not a fan of tests either. So what we do in MTA is we ask you to do a project that benefits your district. Use something that you learned during this year or that we can help you with. Many of you have sent those in, and guess what? They are safely in a stack on Diana's desk. That's the good news. The bad news is they're safely in a stack on Diana's desk. Now that's better than being on my desk. When we get back into our building, late June, beginning in July, we'll start looking through those and you'll hear back from us on the projects. We will also be emailing each one of you an evaluation form. Every year at the end of the class, we do an evaluation form. I take those very seriously. So what you answer on there, your feedback is how we help to fine tune next year's program. At the end of the day, this program is worthless unless it's of value to you. So the goal is that we continue to fine tune it, adjust it, make the tweaks that we need to, things that you're asking for. My goal is that we find a way to build them into the program. So when you get those, if you'd be so kind as to fill them out and get them back to us, Diana and Doug and I will work our way through those and we'll use that to tweak what we do next year for you. So having said that, next year's schedule is posted. You can't sign up for it. We don't have the classes live yet. Lori will be publishing those at some point later in the summer. But if you go to our website under the Transportation Services section, look in the MTA, the registration forms as well as the class syllabus for next year are already available there. And so if you'll take a look at those, fill out those registration forms, go ahead and send them in, and that way we can start saving you a seat in the class. And I got to predicate this by saying, I have no idea what COVID-19 is going to do to us this fall. I'm at this point going to say to you, I certainly hope we can have face-to-face sessions. I think those are more rewarding to me. I will tell you that. I think it's also more value when we can interact with you and you can ask questions as we go. I've tried to keep up with your questions in the chat box here, but go ahead and sign up and register. And then if we have to make changes in how we do things this fall, you can be sure that we'll let you know. Diana, what have I missed? Evaluations. Oh, if you're graduating this year, I don't know if all you know this, but every year when we have a class graduate, we create a certificate and we post it on our website. So those that have graduated from the whole program will get a certificate. And actually, Diana will be mailing out certificates to all of you for having completed today's class. I think the final thing I want to share with you is that in order to finish a year of MTA, you do need to complete all 6 classes. Sometimes that's hard, even though we offer them twice. I know work gets in the way and sometimes you just can't leave the office and something's going on, or more often than not, you have to drive because you're short some staff. So every one of this year's sessions, and this one will be also, are posted online on the MTI website. If you missed a class, what you need to do is go back and watch the videos. We've broken them up into little pieces. And then there's a short list of questions, 10 to 15 questions just on the high points. Watch the video, answer the questions, send them to Diana, and then we'll mark you off as having attended that class, and that way you'll get full credit for the program. So if there are any other questions, thank you all for being with us today, and stay tuned for more news coming out from us, but also from ODE and CDC and the governor's office, figuring out what we're going to do this fall. I think all of us have some challenging days ahead of us. The logistics and transportation are going to be formidable. More importantly than everything, and many of you have heard me say this a couple times in the last month, make sure you are talking to your superintendent. Transportation has to be at the table when we talk about the restart and the reset plans, to make sure that they don't try and write a check that you can't cash. So there's a lot of questions out there. We don't know how many kids we can put on a bus. We don't know how many kids we can put in a building, but together we're going to lean on each other. We're going to look for wisdom, advice, and guidance, and know that at the end of the day, every one of us is doing the same thing, and there is strength in numbers. So if you have questions, reach out. Please take advantage of the friendships you've made through MTA with the peers. You have the class lists. The reference library remains available to you. It's on our website. So anything you need to know, go there, look it up. Can't find it, drop an email to Diana or Doug or myself, and we'll find a way to make it available for you. So thank you all. Have a great rest of the day, and go find some chips somewhere to eat. Take care.